The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room, casting long shadows across the polished oak table where I had spent countless hours building what I thought was our family legacy. My hands were steady as I set down my coffee cup, though my heart was racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. At 45, I had dedicated the better part of 2 decades to nurturing and growing our family business, pouring my soul into every contract negotiation, every client relationship, every strategic decision that had transformed us from a small regional operation into something truly special. My younger sister, Emma, sat across from me, her perfectly manicured nails tapping rhythmically against the table's surface, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. At 42, she still carried herself with the same poise that had made her the darling of every social event we'd ever attended together. Her auburn hair was styled in an elegant chignon, not a strand out of place, and her designer suit probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. But beneath that polished exterior, I could see the determination in her hazel eyes, the same look she'd had when we were children and she'd decided that my favorite doll was actually hers. The boardroom began to fill with familiar faces, men and women who had watched us grow up, who had attended our father's retirement party just 6 months ago, who knew the intricate dynamics of the Morrison family better than they probably should. Mr. Henderson, our longest-serving board member, gave me a sympathetic nod as he took his seat. Mrs. Chen, who had mentored me through my first major acquisition, avoided my gaze entirely. They all knew what was coming, had probably known for weeks while I'd been blissfully focused on closing our latest distribution deal. Emma cleared her throat, that delicate sound that somehow commanded attention in any room. She had always possessed that quality, the ability to make people lean in, to hang on her every word. It was a gift I'd never mastered, too busy with spreadsheets and logistics software to learn the art of commanding a room with presence alone. "Before we begin today's agenda," she started, her voice carrying the weight of rehearsed confidence, "there's a matter that requires immediate attention." My stomach tightened, though I kept my expression neutral. 20 years in business had taught me the value of a poker face, even when the stakes were personal. Especially when the stakes were personal. I watched as Emma straightened her shoulders, assuming the posture of authority she'd been practicing in front of mirrors since our father had announced her as his chosen successor. It should have been a proud moment for our family, the passing of the torch to the next generation. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the person behind you was about to push. After careful consideration and consultation with our board, Emma continued, her eyes finally meeting mine, we've decided to restructure our executive team to better position Morrison Logistics for future growth. The words were corporate speak, sanitized and professional, but I heard the personal vendetta beneath them. This wasn't about positioning or growth or any of the buzzwords she'd learned in her MBA program. This was about something much older, much deeper than quarterly earnings or market share. I thought back to all the times I'd covered for her mistakes, smoothed over her lapses in judgment, quietly fixed the problems she'd created while she took the credit. Like the time she'd nearly lost our biggest client by forgetting to submit their shipping manifests, and I'd spent 48 hours straight rebuilding their trust and our systems. Or when she'd hired her sorority sister for a crucial position, only to have the woman embezzle $30,000 before disappearing. I'd absorbed that loss personally to protect the company's reputation and Emma's pride. Effective immediately, Emma announced, her voice growing stronger with each word, we'll be eliminating the position of Executive Vice President of Operations. The room fell silent except for the subtle sound of uncomfortable shifting in leather chairs. Rebecca Morrison, while we appreciate your years of service, your role has become redundant in our new structure. Please have your office cleared by end of business tomorrow. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to react, to show the emotion she expected. This was her moment of triumph, carefully orchestrated and flawlessly executed. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, waiting to see if I would crumble, if I would beg, if I would finally show the weakness Emma had always insisted was there beneath my composed exterior. But I had learned long ago that the best response to a bully wasn't to cower or fight back in the expected way. It was to refuse to play their game at all. I nodded slowly, gathering my leather portfolio with the same care I'd shown every morning for the past 20 years. "Understood," I said simply, my voice carrying a calmness I didn't entirely feel. "I'll have facilities coordinate the transition of my materials." Emma's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together slightly, the only sign that my response wasn't what she'd anticipated. She had probably imagined tears, protests, maybe even gratitude for being allowed to leave with dignity. Instead, I was treating this like any other business transaction, professional to the end. That's all you have to say?" she asked, a note of frustration creeping into her carefully modulated tone. I stood, smoothing my skirt with practiced ease. "What would you like me to say, Emma? You've made your decision, and as CEO, that's your prerogative. I wish you and the company all the best." I turned to address the board members, making eye contact with each of them in turn. "It's been an honor working alongside all of you. The relationships we've built and the success we've achieved together will always be among my proudest accomplishments." Mrs. Chen's eyes glistened with what might have been tears, and even stoic Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable. But none of them spoke up. None of them challenged Emma's decision. Family business politics were complicated, and they all knew better than to get between the Morrison sisters. I understood their position and harbored no resentment. They had their own careers and investments to protect. As I reached the door, I paused, turning back to face my sister one last time. She sat straighter, probably expecting the confrontation she'd been denied. Instead, I smiled. The same gentle smile I'd given her when she was 6 and had accidentally broken my favorite music box. "Emma," I said softly, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Then I walked out, closing the door behind me with a quiet click that somehow seemed louder than any slam could have been. The hallway stretched before me, familiar yet suddenly foreign. I had walked these corridors thousands of times, rushed through them with contracts that needed signatures, strolled through them while on conference calls with suppliers in Taiwan and manufacturers in Mexico. Now I was walking them for one of the last times, and the weight of that realization settled around my shoulders like a heavy cloak. My assistant, Jennifer, was waiting by my office door, her young face creased with concern. At 28, she had been with me for only 3 years, but in that time, she had become indispensable, not just as an employee, but as someone who understood the rhythms of my work life better than almost anyone. "Miss Morrison," she began, then stopped, clearly unsure what to say. The news had probably spread through the building's gossip network faster than Emma's official announcement. "It's okay, Jen," I assured her, unlocking my office door and gesturing for her to follow me inside. "These things happen in family businesses. Transitions are rarely smooth." She closed the door behind us, and I could see her struggling to maintain professional composure. "But it's not fair," she burst out, then immediately looked horrified at her outburst. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't—" "No," I interrupted gently, sinking into my desk chair and looking around the office I had carefully curated over the years. "You're right, it isn't fair. But fair and business rarely go hand in hand, especially when family is involved." I opened my desk drawer, pulling out a leather-bound journal I'd kept since my first day at the company. "Do you know what the hardest part about working with family is, Jen?" She shook her head, perching on the edge of one of my visitors' chairs like a bird ready to take flight. "The hardest part," I continued, flipping through pages filled with meeting notes and strategic plans, "is that you can never really leave work at work. Every Sunday dinner becomes a board meeting. Every holiday gathering has an undercurrent of corporate politics, and every childhood resentment gets amplified by adult ambitions." Jennifer's eyes widened with understanding. She had often wondered, I'm sure, why Emma and I maintained such formal distance despite being sisters. Now she was getting a glimpse behind the carefully maintained corporate curtain. "When we were children," I shared, surprising myself with the confession, "Emma and I were actually quite close. She was 3 years younger, and I felt protective of her. I would help her with homework, teach her how to ride her bike, defend her from neighborhood bullies." I pulled out a small framed photo from my drawer, one I hadn't looked at in years. It showed 2 young girls in matching Easter dresses, arms around each other, beaming at the camera. But somewhere along the way, protection became competition. My achievements became her measuring stick, and her charm became my impossible standard. Our parents, bless them, never saw it happening. They were too busy building the business to notice they were also building a rivalry. "What changed?" Jennifer asked softly, drawn into the story despite herself. I set the photo aside, returning my attention to the present. "Success," I said simply. When the company started growing, really growing, suddenly there were stakes beyond sibling squabbles. There were titles and salaries and stock options. There was the question of who would inherit not just a business, but a legacy. I stood, moving to the window that overlooked the loading docks where I'd spent so many hours optimizing our logistics chains. Our father made his choice 6 months ago when he retired. He chose the daughter who looked the part, who could charm investors at cocktail parties and make small talk with board members' wives. He didn't choose the daughter who could negotiate freight rates or implement inventory management systems, and honestly, I understood his logic even if it broke my heart. "So what will you do now?" Jennifer asked, voicing the question I'd been avoiding since walking out of that boardroom. I turned from the window, surprised to find I was smiling. "Do you know what's funny, Jen? For the first time in 20 years, I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't have a quarterly projection or a strategic roadmap, and it's oddly liberating." But even as I said the words, the gears in my mind were already turning. You see, what Emma didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been preparing for this possibility for years, not because I expected betrayal, but because I had learned long ago that the only person you can truly depend on is yourself. It was a lesson taught not by business school, but by experience, carved into my consciousness by 1,000 small disappointments and recovered failures. 5 years earlier, when the whispers about succession had first begun, I had made a decision that seemed minor at the time, but would prove to be my salvation. I had created a consulting company, our Morrison Strategic Solutions, LLC. On paper, it looked like a simple tax optimization strategy, a way to maximize certain deductions and minimize liability. Our accountants had approved it without question, and our lawyers had structured it perfectly legally. What they hadn't realized, what Emma certainly hadn't realized in her rush to claim the throne, was that I had been slowly, carefully transitioning our major client relationships to contract through my LLC rather than directly with Morrison Logistics. It wasn't deceptive. All the paperwork was transparent and available for review. But Emma had been too focused on organizational charts and corporate hierarchies to pay attention to the fine print of contract modifications. "Jennifer," I said suddenly, my voice taking on the decisive tone she knew well, "I need you to pull all of our client contracts, the master files, not the summaries. And I need you to pay particular attention to the signature pages and the party definitions." She looked puzzled, but immediately reached for her tablet. "What am I looking for?" she asked, fingers already flying across the screen. "You're looking for which entity is actually contracted to provide services," I explained, feeling the familiar rush of strategic thinking flooding back. "And I think you'll find that about 70% of our revenue isn't actually contracted with Morrison Logistics. It's contracted with our Morrison Strategic Solutions, with Morrison Logistics listed as a fulfillment partner." Jennifer's gasp told me she understood the implications. "You mean—" She trailed off, apparently unable to finish the thought. "I mean," I confirmed, "that Emma just fired me from a position at a company that's about to lose the majority of its revenue stream. Unless, of course, they'd like to negotiate a partnership agreement with my consulting firm." It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was protection, the same instinct that had driven me to help my little sister all those years ago, only now turned toward self-preservation. I had built those client relationships over decades, earned their trust through consistent delivery and personal attention. The contracts simply reflected the reality that they were buying my expertise, not just warehouse space and truck routes. Over the next few hours, Jennifer and I worked with quiet efficiency, documenting everything, creating copies of crucial documents, preparing for the inevitable storm that would follow. As we worked, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. For 20 years, I had sublimated my own ambitions for the sake of family harmony and business stability. Now, forced into independence, I was rediscovering parts of myself I had almost forgotten existed. The call came sooner than expected. My phone rang at exactly 5:47 p.m., just as Jennifer was packing up the last of my personal items. Emma's name flashed on the screen, and I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Emma," I said pleasantly, as if she hadn't just ended my career 6 hours earlier. "Rebecca, what have you done?" Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "I've been getting calls from clients all afternoon. They're saying they won't renew without you, that their contracts are with some other company. What is going on?" I settled back in my chair, savoring the moment despite myself. "What's going on is that you fired me without doing your due diligence. Did you really think you could run the operations side of the business? Did you even look at how our contracts were structured?" "This is sabotage," she hissed, and I could picture her pacing in her new CEO office, the one she had been decorating for months in anticipation of her ascension. "This is exactly the kind of underhanded—" "It's business, Emma," I interrupted calmly. "Something you might have learned if you'd spent less time at charity galas and more time understanding how our company actually works." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could feel her fury through the phone, the same rage she'd displayed as a child when things didn't go her way. But we weren't children anymore, and tantrums wouldn't fix this problem. "The board will sue you," she finally managed. "They'll say you stole company property, that you violated your fiduciary duty." "Let them try," I responded, my voice steady. "Every contract was negotiated transparently. Every modification was approved by legal and documented properly. I followed every rule, Emma. I just played a longer game than you realized was being played." I paused, then added more gently, "I never wanted it to be this way. We could have run the company together, combined your social skills with my operational expertise, but you wanted it all, and in trying to take everything, you might end up with nothing." The transformation of my professional life over the following weeks was both exhausting and exhilarating. Operating from a temporary office space while I searched for a permanent location for R. Morrison Strategic Solutions, I fielded calls from concerned clients who had received Emma's frantic attempts to retain their business. One by one, they confirmed what I had known in my heart. They had signed with me, not with Morrison Logistics. "Rebecca, I'll be honest," said Patricia Hawthorne, CEO of one of our largest retail clients, during a lunch meeting 3 weeks after my dismissal. "When I got Emma's call saying she was taking over your accounts, my first thought was to start looking for another logistics provider. No offense to your sister, but she doesn't know the difference between cross-docking and drop shipping." I smiled ruefully, stirring my soup as we sat in Patricia's executive dining room. "Emma has many talents. Operations just isn't one of them." Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. "Which brings me to my point. We're not just renewing with your firm. We want to expand our contract. With you operating independently, we're hoping for even more innovative solutions without the corporate bureaucracy." It was a pattern that repeated with client after client. Free from the constraints of Morrison Logistics' traditional approaches and board approval processes, I could offer customized solutions, faster implementation, and the kind of personal attention that had become increasingly rare in our automated world. Within a month, I had not only retained my existing clients, but had begun attracting new ones who had heard about my departure through the industry grapevine. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to eliminate me as competition, Emma had actually freed me to become the competitor she had feared I would be. But despite the professional satisfaction, there was a personal sadness that lingered. We were sisters, after all, bound by blood and shared history, even if we were now divided by business. My mother called one evening as I was reviewing contracts in my new office, a converted warehouse space that better reflected my practical aesthetic than the corporate polish of Morrison Logistics. "Rebecca, darling," she began, and I could hear the weariness in her voice. "This has to stop. Your father is beside himself, and Emma is not handling the pressure well." I set down my pen, giving her my full attention. "What would you have me do, Mom? She fired me. Publicly. Humiliatingly. Was I supposed to just accept it and disappear?" There was a long pause before she answered. "I would have you remember that success isn't worth anything if you have no one to share it with. You girls were so close once. Do you remember how you used to protect her?" The memory hit me unexpectedly hard. Emma at 5, crying because some boys had teased her about her freckles. Me at 8, marching up to those boys and threatening to tell their mothers if they didn't apologize. The fierce protectiveness I had felt, the absolute certainty that no one was allowed to hurt my little sister. When had that protection turned into competition? When had we stopped being allies and started being adversaries? "I remember, Mom," I said softly. "But she's not that little girl anymore, and I can't protect her from the consequences of her own choices." My mother sighed, the sound carrying decades of hopes and disappointments. "I know, sweetheart. I wish your father and I had handled things differently. We pushed you both so hard, made everything a competition. Best grades, best achievements, best daughter. We thought we were motivating you, but I think we just taught you to see each other as rivals instead of sisters." After we hung up, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my success, feeling oddly hollow. The contracts, the clients, the growing bank accounts, they were all victories, but Pyrrhic ones. I had won the battle, but at the cost of my family relationships. The question was whether those relationships had been genuine to begin with, or just another form of corporate politics dressed up in familial clothing. A knock on my door interrupted my brooding. Jennifer peered in, looking concerned. "You're here late again," she observed, entering with a cup of tea she had somehow procured despite the late hour. "Big day tomorrow?" I accepted the tea gratefully. "Board meeting at Morrison Logistics. They've requested my presence to discuss a potential partnership agreement." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Are you going to do it? Partner with them after what they did?" I had been wrestling with that question for days. The smart business move would be to stay independent, to continue building my own empire free from the dysfunction of family drama. But there was more at stake than profit margins and market share. There was the question of who I wanted to be, not just as a businesswoman, but as a person. "Did I ever tell you why I went into logistics?" I asked Jennifer, who shook her head and settled into a chair, recognizing the signs of one of my reflective moods. "When I was 15, my father took Emma and me to the port to see the container ships. Emma was bored within 5 minutes, but I was fascinated. All those containers, each one representing someone's business, someone's dream. The complexity of moving goods from one side of the world to the other, the precision required, the trust involved." I smiled at the memory. My father saw my interest and started teaching me about the business, manifests and bills of lading, freight forwarding, and customs clearance. Emma would roll her eyes and go practice her violin or attend her dance classes. She thought I was boring, choosing spreadsheets over social events, but I saw beauty in the efficiency, elegance in the optimization. Every successful delivery was a promise kept. "You still see it that way, don't you?" Jennifer observed. "Even after everything, you still love the work itself." She was right, of course. Despite the corporate drama and family dysfunction, I still felt that same thrill when I solved a complex routing problem or negotiated a better rate for a client. The work had never betrayed me, even if the people had. The next morning, I dressed carefully for the board meeting, choosing a conservative suit that projected professionalism without ostentation. As I drove to the Morrison Logistics headquarters, I thought about all the times I had made this journey, rushing to early meetings, returning late from client dinners, building a life around a company that had ultimately rejected me. The security guard at the front desk looked uncomfortable as he signed me in as a visitor, both of us remembering when I had my own executive parking space and unlimited access. But I smiled warmly, refusing to make his job harder because of circumstances beyond his control. That had always been my way, treating everyone from janitors to CEOs with equal respect. It was something Emma had never understood, viewing such behavior as beneath an executive's dignity. The boardroom was full when I arrived. The same faces that had watched my dismissal now gathered to potentially beg for my cooperation. The irony was almost theatrical. Emma sat at the head of the table, in our father's old spot, but her usual poise was noticeably frayed. Dark circles under her eyes suggested sleepless nights, and her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled papers. "Rebecca," Mr. Henderson began, clearly designated as the spokesperson for this delicate negotiation. "Thank you for coming. We appreciate your willingness to discuss a path forward that benefits all parties." I nodded graciously, taking a seat across from Emma, maintaining eye contact as I responded. I'm always open to discussions that make good business sense. However, I want to be clear that our Morrison Strategic Solutions is doing quite well independently. Any partnership would need to offer compelling advantages for my clients. What followed was a careful dance of negotiation, with board members outlining their proposal and me countering with my requirements. Through it all, Emma remained largely silent, her presence a reminder of how we had arrived at this point. They needed me. That much was obvious. Without my client relationships and operational expertise, Morrison Logistics would be reduced to a shell of its former self. But as I listened to their offers and weighed their proposals, I found myself thinking about something beyond contracts and profit margins. I thought about legacy, about what kind of story I wanted to tell about my business life. Did I want to be remembered as the woman who destroyed her family's company out of spite? Or as someone who found a way to transform betrayal into opportunity for everyone involved? "I have a counterproposal," I announced when they had finished their presentation. "Our Morrison Strategic Solutions will enter into an exclusive partnership with Morrison Logistics for fulfillment services. You'll handle the physical logistics while we maintain client relationships and strategic planning. It's a true partnership, 50-50 profit split after expenses, joint decision-making on major initiatives." The board members exchanged glances, calculating the implications. It was more generous than they had dared hope, but less than they needed. Emma finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "And what about governance? Who makes final decisions in disputes?" I met her gaze directly. "We create a joint operating committee with equal representation. Deadlocks go to a mutually agreed-upon arbitrator. Neither of us gets unilateral control." It was a solution that acknowledged the reality. We needed each other, whether we liked it or not. Morrison Logistics had the infrastructure, the warehouses, the transportation network. I had the relationships, the expertise, the trust of clients who drove revenue. Apart, we were both diminished. Together, even in an uneasy alliance, we could be formidable. The negotiations continued for hours, working through details and addressing concerns. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed Emma's shoulders gradually relaxing, her contributions becoming more substantive. When she suggested a clever solution to a particularly thorny liability issue, I found myself nodding appreciatively. "That's actually brilliant," I admitted, surprising both of us. For a moment, her face lit up with the same expression she'd worn as a child when I praised her drawings or celebrated her academic achievements. Then, as if remembering our current circumstances, her expression shuddered again. But the moment had happened, a tiny crack in the wall between us. As the meeting concluded with a tentative agreement to have lawyers draft formal documents, board members filed out until only Emma and I remained. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air between us. "Why?" she asked finally. "You had us over a barrel. You could have demanded much more." I gathered my things slowly, considering my answer. "Because, Emma, at the end of the day, we're going to grow old with the choices we make today. I can be wealthy and alone, or I can be successful and still have a chance at having a sister. The money will come either way. I'm good at what I do. But family? That's not something you can acquire through strategic planning." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was so jealous," she admitted, the words seemingly pulled from her against her will. "Everyone always talked about how brilliant you were, how you could see solutions no one else could. I felt invisible next to you." I set down my bag, really looking at my sister for the first time in years, and I was jealous of how easily you connected with people, how you could walk into a room and own it without trying. I felt awkward and boring next to you. We stared at each other across the conference table, two successful women who had spent decades feeling insufficient, measuring ourselves against each other instead of recognizing our complementary strengths. It was a tragedy of miscommunication and misunderstanding, fueled by parental expectations and our own insecurities. "I'm sorry I fired you," Emma said quietly. "It was petty and short-sighted and I think I did it because I was scared that everyone would realize I couldn't do the job without you." The admission hung between us, raw and honest in a way we hadn't been with each other in years. "I'm sorry I made you feel that way," I replied. I never meant to overshadow you. I was just trying to prove myself, same as you. We didn't hug or cry or have a dramatic reconciliation. We were too old, too set in our ways, and too much had happened for instant forgiveness. But we nodded at each other, a mutual acknowledgement of pain caused and responsibility accepted. It was a beginning, tentative and fragile, but real. Over the following months, as our partnership agreement was implemented, we slowly began to rebuild not just our business relationship, but our personal one as well. It wasn't easy. There were heated disagreements, moments of regression where old patterns reasserted themselves, times when I wondered if we were fooling ourselves thinking we could make it work. But there were also moments of genuine collaboration, when Emma's marketing insight combined with my operational expertise to create solutions neither of us could have developed alone. There were late-night strategy sessions that reminded me of our childhood sleepovers, only now discussing market penetration instead of boy crushes. There were small victories celebrated together and challenges faced as a united front. The company thrived under our joint leadership, growing faster than it ever had under single control. Clients appreciated the comprehensive service we could offer, and employees benefited from the diverse leadership styles we brought. It turned out that what made us incompatible as hierarchical colleagues made us formidable as equal partners. One evening, almost a year after that fateful firing, Emma and I found ourselves working late again, surrounded by the remnants of Chinese takeout and budget projections. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if we'd figured this out earlier?" she asked, stretching tired muscles. I considered the question, thinking about all the years of competition and conflict. Maybe we needed to go through this to get here, I suggested. Maybe we had to lose each other to realize what we were missing. She nodded thoughtfully. Mom's thrilled, you know. She says she finally has her daughters back. It was true. Family dinners had become less stilted, holidays less fraught with tension. We were rebuilding not just as business partners, but as sisters. "Rebecca," Emma said suddenly, "I need to tell you something. That day I fired you, I threw up afterward. I was so nervous, so convinced you would destroy me in response. When you just walked out with dignity, I didn't know what to do. I'd prepared for war, and you gave me grace instead." I smiled sadly. "I wanted to destroy you. For about 30 seconds, I imagined all the ways I could ruin your life. Then I remembered teaching you to tie your shoes and decided I'd rather teach you to run a company properly instead." We both laughed, the sound echoing in the empty office. It wasn't the carefree laughter of our childhood, but something richer, earned through pain and growth and the choice to be better than our worst impulses. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing a business, a dream, a story of ambition and hope. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey from that devastating boardroom firing to this new reality we had created. It hadn't followed any business plan or strategic roadmap. Instead, it had required something harder than leveraging contracts or maximizing profits. It had required forgiveness of Emma for her betrayal, of our parents for their role in creating our rivalry, and perhaps most importantly, of myself for all the years I had chosen competition over connection. The business world often talks about win-win scenarios, but they rarely acknowledge how much losing is required to get there. I had lost my position, my security, my carefully constructed corporate identity. But in that loss, I had found something more valuable: the freedom to define success on my own terms, and the wisdom to recognize that true achievement isn't a zero-sum game. Emma and I would never have the uncomplicated sisterhood we might have enjoyed without the pressures of family business. Too much had happened. Too many wounds had been inflicted on both sides. But we had something possibly more precious, a partnership forged in fire, tested by betrayal, and strengthened by the choice to rise above our basest instincts. 6 months later, we stood together at an industry awards ceremony, accepting recognition for innovation in logistics management. As Emma gave her portion of the acceptance speech, charming the audience with her natural charisma, I felt a surge of genuine pride. When it was my turn to speak, I talked about the power of complementary strengths and the courage required to transform competition into collaboration. "The greatest risk in business," I concluded, looking directly at my sister, "isn't market volatility or economic downturns. It's letting ego prevent us from recognizing that our greatest competitors might actually be our most valuable partners. Sometimes the person across the table isn't the enemy. They're the missing piece of your success story. The audience applauded, probably thinking I was speaking in abstract business terms. But Emma knew, and I knew, and that was enough. We had written a new ending to our story, one where both sisters could be successful, where strength wasn't measured by dominance, but by the grace to share power and the wisdom to recognize that some victories are sweeter when they're mutual. As we left the stage together, Emma linked her arm through mine, a spontaneous gesture that surprised us both. "You know," she said quietly, "I think Grandpa Morrison would be proud. He always said the company should stay in the family. He just never specified it had to be run by only one family member at a time." I squeezed her arm gently. "He also said that the best business deals are the ones where everyone leaves the table satisfied. It just took us a while to realize we were sitting at the wrong table." The transformation of Morrison Logistics into Morrison Strategic Partners became a case study in family business evolution. But for Emma and me, it was simply the continuation of a story that began with two little girls in matching Easter dresses. We had taken the long way around to partnership through betrayal and redemption, loss and recovery. But perhaps that circuitous route made our eventual collaboration stronger, built as it was on hard-won understanding rather than naive assumptions. In quiet moments when I'm reviewing contracts or analyzing logistics chains, I sometimes think about that morning in the boardroom when Emma fired me. At the time, it felt like the end of everything I had worked for. Now I recognize it as the beginning of something better, not just a more successful business model, but a more authentic life. She had freed me from the golden cage of family expectations, forcing me to discover what I could build when the only person I had to answer to was myself. The irony is delicious. By trying to eliminate me, Emma had created her most formidable competitor. But the greater irony is that in competing, we had discovered our need for collaboration. We were like two chemical elements that were stable alone but explosive when combined in the wrong proportions. It had taken us 4 decades to find the right formula, but once we did, the results were transformative. Our story became something of a legend in Nashville business circles, told and retold with various embellishments. Some versions painted me as the brilliant strategist who had outsmarted everyone. Others portrayed Emma as the visionary who had orchestrated everything to force a necessary change. The truth, as always, was messier and more human. We were just two sisters who had lost our way and fought to find it again, discovering that the path forward required walking together rather than racing against each other. Looking back now, I can see the threads that led to that pivotal moment. Every childhood slight magnified by adult insecurity, every parental comparison internalized as inadequacy, every business success interpreted as a personal attack on the other. We had been set on a collision course from the moment our father decided to build a family business without considering what it might do to the family itself. But we had also been given the tools for reconciliation, shared memories of better times, complementary skills that made us stronger together, and ultimately, the maturity to recognize that being right was less important than being whole. The firing that should have destroyed us became the catalyst for rebuilding, not just as business partners, but as sisters who had chosen each other despite having every reason not to. The company's success under our joint leadership exceeded everyone's expectations, including our own. Revenue doubled within 18 months, client retention reached an industry-leading 97%, and we expanded into markets that had seemed unreachable under the old structure. But more importantly, we had proven that it was possible to transform dysfunction into function, rivalry into partnership, and hurt into healing. Emma and I still have our moments of friction. 40 years of ingrained patterns don't disappear overnight. There are times when her need for control clashes with my drive for efficiency, when her focus on image conflicts with my preference for substance. But now, we have mechanisms for working through conflict. Built on the foundation of mutual respect, we had to lose everything to find. Our mother, who had watched her daughter's relationship deteriorate with helpless sorrow, now speaks of the transformation with tears in her eyes. "I prayed for this," she told us recently over Sunday dinner, the first one in years where business talk was punctuated by genuine laughter rather than tense silence. Not for the company's success, but for my girls to find their way back to each other. My father, initially devastated by the near collapse of his legacy, had come to see our partnership as an evolution rather than a betrayal of his vision. "I built a company," he reflected during one of our quarterly advisory meetings, "but you two built something better, a true partnership. Maybe that was always the plan, even if I didn't know it." The truth is, there was no master plan, no grand strategy beyond survival and stubbornness. Emma and I had stumbled our way toward partnership through pain and pride, making mistakes and course corrections along the way. We had learned that forgiveness isn't a single act, but a daily choice, that trust isn't given but earned through consistent action, and that family business success requires putting family first and business second, even when every instinct screams to do the opposite. As I write this, sitting in my office, now truly mine in a way it never was before, I can hear Emma on a conference call in the next room, her voice animated as she pitches a new marketing initiative. We had knocked down the wall between our offices 6 months ago, creating a shared workspace that allows for easy collaboration while maintaining individual areas. It's a physical manifestation of our business relationship, connected but not consumed, together but still ourselves. Sometimes young entrepreneurs reach out, having heard our story, asking for advice on working with family and business. I always tell them the same thing. The person across the table from you in a family business isn't just a colleague or competitor. They're someone you'll have to face at Thanksgiving dinner for the rest of your life. Make decisions accordingly. Be ruthless in protecting your worth, but generous in sharing your success. And remember that the best revenge for being undervalued is not destruction, but demonstration of what they missed. Emma typically adds her own perspective. Don't mistake familiarity for understanding. Just because you grew up with someone doesn't mean you know who they've become. Take time to meet your family members as the adults they are, not the children you remember. And never, ever fire someone without understanding exactly what they bring to the table. You might find yourself begging them to come back. We laugh about it now, this hard-won wisdom earned through conflict and reconciliation. But there's truth in our humor, lessons written in scar tissue and signed with tears. We had taken the hardest possible route to partnership, but perhaps that's what made it sustainable. Easy alliances crumble under pressure. Those forged in fire tend to endure. The business continues to grow, driven by the creative tension between Emma's vision and my execution. We've expanded beyond logistics into supply chain consulting, helping other family businesses navigate the treacherous waters of succession planning and sibling partnership. It turns out our messy story, far from being a liability, is actually our greatest credential. We've been where our clients are, felt what they feel, and found a way forward that honors both ambition and affection. In the end, that morning when Emma fired me wasn't the catastrophe it seemed. It was a gift wrapped in sandpaper. She had forced me to confront my own worth independent of family validation, to build something that was truly mine before choosing to share it. And in doing so, she had unknowingly created the conditions for genuine partnership, one based on mutual need rather than obligatory connection. The sweet irony that I had promised myself, turning betrayal into triumph, had indeed materialized, but not in the way I'd imagined. Yes, I had built a successful independent business, and yes, I had proven my worth in undeniable terms. But the real triumph was in transcending the need for revenge, in choosing connection over conquest, in discovering that the sweetest success is the one you can share with someone who truly understands its cost. As the sun sets over Nashville's skyline, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I think about the journey that brought us here. Two sisters who lost their way in the maze of family business dynamics, who confused competition with competence and rivalry with respect. We had wounded each other deeply, acted from our worst impulses, and very nearly destroyed our grandfather's legacy in our battle to claim it. But we had also found our way back. Not to where we started, but to somewhere better. A place of chosen partnership, rather than assumed alliance, of recognized strengths rather than resented differences. We had learned that in family business, as in family itself, the goal isn't to win but to thrive together, to build something larger than individual ambition, to create a legacy worth leaving. Emma appears in our shared doorway, holding 2 glasses of wine, a ritual we've developed to mark the end of particularly challenging days. "Thought you could use this," she says, offering me a glass. "Long day?" I accept gratefully, noting the exhaustion around her eyes that mirrors my own. "Long but good. The Patterson Industries proposal went through, largest contract in company history." She raises her glass in a toast. "To the sister who makes the impossible possible," she says with genuine warmth. I clink my glass against hers. "And to the sister who makes the possible profitable," I counter. We drink, the wine rich and complex, like our relationship, notes of shared history and hard-won wisdom, with a finish that speaks of futures yet to be written. "You know," Emma muses, settling into the chair across from my desk, "if someone had told me 2 years ago we'd be here, working side by side, actually enjoying it, I would have laughed them out of the room." I smile, remembering my own certainty that our relationship was irreparably broken. We were different people then, scared people, fighting for scraps of approval instead of building our own feast. She nods thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't prepared? If you hadn't set up your LLC and protected those contracts?" It's a question I've pondered often. "I think we would have ended up here eventually," I answer honestly. "It might have taken longer, been messier, cost us more, but ultimately we're too stubborn to fail and too connected to stay apart. We would have found our way." "Through sheer Morrison stubbornness," Emma agrees, invoking our grandfather's favorite explanation for the family's success. "Though I prefer to think of it as resilience," I counter, and we share a knowing look. Resilience, the ability to bend without breaking, to absorb impact and spring back stronger. It's what had saved our company and our relationship, what continues to drive us forward even when the path is unclear. As Emma leaves to finish her own work, I return to the contracts on my desk, but my mind lingers on our conversation. 2 years ago, I had walked out of a boardroom devastated by betrayal. Today, I sit in an office I've earned, running a business I've built, partnered with a sister I've chosen. The journey between those 2 points had been neither straight nor smooth, but it had led to something neither of us could have achieved alone. The numbers tell one story. Revenue doubled, client base expanded, market position strengthened. But the human story is richer and more complex. It's about 2 women who learned that strength isn't about standing alone, but about knowing when to stand together. It's about discovering that the person you think is your greatest obstacle might actually be your missing piece. It's about choosing love over law, connection over conquest, partnership over pride. Most of all, it's about second chances. The one Emma unknowingly gave me when she set me free, and the one I chose to give her when I could have destroyed her. In the end, those mutual acts of grace, intentional or not, created space for something beautiful to grow in the ashes of what we'd burned down. The Morrison sisters, they call us now in business circles, as if we're a single entity, and perhaps we are. 2 halves of a whole that took 40 years to recognize itself. We still have our individual identities, our separate lives, and distinct contributions. But in the space where business and family intersect, we've found a harmony that eluded us for so long. As night falls over Nashville and the office quiets, I allow myself a moment of pure gratitude. For the firing that freed me, for the sister who challenged me, for the journey that changed me. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, fresh opportunities to test our partnership and push our boundaries. But tonight, I'm simply thankful for the winding path that led us here, to this place of mutual respect and shared success. The company my grandfather built has become something he probably never imagined, a testament not just to business acumen, but to the power of transformation, the possibility of redemption, and the enduring strength of family bonds tested by fire and forged anew. It's a legacy I'm proud to share, a story I'm grateful to be writing, and a partnership I no longer take for granted. In the quiet of my office, surrounded by the tangible evidence of our success, I think about that scared, angry woman who walked out of a boardroom 2 years ago. I wish I could tell her that everything would work out, that the betrayal she felt would become the catalyst for something extraordinary. But perhaps not knowing was part of the journey. part of what made the eventual reconciliation so precious. We had to believe it was over before we could begin again. We had to lose each other completely before we could choose to be found. And in that choosing, daily, deliberately, despite all the reasons not to, we discovered that the best business partnerships, like the best relationships, aren't about perfection, but about persistence. Not about avoiding conflict, but about resolving it with grace. The Morrison sisters' story continues, written in contracts and conversations, measured in profit and partnership. But at its heart, it's simply the story of two women who remembered they were sisters first and rivals second, who chose connection over competition, who built something beautiful from the ruins of something broken. It's a story I'm proud to tell and even prouder to be living, one reconciled day at a time.